coaching. Kuno coaching.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Kuno podcast. We've got Brandon Dohman again with us today. How are you doing, Brandon?
Hello. Doing very good. How about yourself?
I'm really good, thank you. And I am really pleased that you've come back on a podcast because we had such an amazing chat last time. And this time we are talking about your new book. How does it feel to be an author?
Good. It was a very long and arduous process, mostly because I think my biggest struggle is I didn't pay as good of attention in my grammar classes as I could. So there was a lot of editing that took place over the course of the book, making sure that grammar and stuff was correct. But other than that, it was a good time. I tend to write as I talk, so I have commas in places that don't need commas, but I really enjoyed getting it out there, and the people who have read it and bought it have been excited about the content that I've put forth. So it's been fun to have that out there and see people transform their careers and using the stuff that I shared with them.
I've been reading this book this week because I've had a magical advance copy, and I've got to say that it's absolutely brilliant. It takes everybody right back to the basics and then starts building them up again to show them actually maybe what you thought was leadership is, it can be a lot different and it can be a lot better. So what do you think is kind of the main takeaway, the main message from this book?
For me, and one of the big reasons I wrote it is I've been in many corporations, many different startups, and leadership always takes a different form in each place. And a lot of people have this notion, and I actually have 2 chapters in the book specifically about it. Take this notion that if you don't have a certain title, that you can't be a leader. And a leader, I think, was something we talked a little bit about last time, is someone who has followers. Like, there's nothing more than that. It doesn't take a title. It doesn't take a special position. It doesn't take $100,000 salary. It's what you do to get people to follow you. And so what I want to share with people is there's not a same path for every single person. Like, every leader is not the same. And I give some examples of Steve Jobs in the book and some of the things that he's done that would maybe not make him a leader, but he is considered one of the top leaders in the world in his field. And so just trying to get people in the right mindset that they can do more than they think they can with wherever they are in their career, whether it's day one or they're a director or a CEO or whatever, just reshaping that mindset that leadership is about helping people and maximizing their talents than it is about you going out and saying things like, oh, trying to be this progressive person that maybe you're not. It's all about maximizing your talents and helping other people.
That was one of the key things that I picked up as well out of the book, the mindset part, because actually a lot of what we do in leadership is mindset, and that just becomes more and more clear the more that you do leadership. So what do you think are kind of, you've mentioned a little bit about it there, what do you think are kind of the top things that people can do to try to adjust their mindset to be a more successful leader?
I think the 2 biggest for me, and this is chapter 1 and 3, is around ownership and ego. For me, ego is the number one killer of all careers, or number one killer of many different things. If you're not willing to get over yourself and work with other people and have compassion, then you're never going to make it anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're in a factory line setting or you're a digital designer, a product designer in a large corporation. Like, if you can't get over yourself and learn how to work with people, you're not going to make it past the level that you made it in as, and you may not even make it very long in that career. So the goal with this mindset section is to get people to understand the concept of ownership and ego, how they play together, and how you can use them in your career. And the biggest thing that I look at ownership is essentially anything that happens that wasn't what you had planned to happen is not anyone else's fault, it's yours. So let's say you're a team lead and you have people working on a project that you have assigned them, and the outcome of that project isn't what you expected. If that happens, it's because you either, one, didn't explain it well enough, you didn't give them the right tools, you didn't act as a snowplow per se to help get all of the corporate BS garbage out of their way so that they could do their job. It's you need to take that internal and reflection and see what you could have done to help them achieve, versus saying, oh, you guys suck at this, let me just do it myself, which tends to be the mindset that most people have, is this that, let me point fingers, I did everything I was supposed to do because this is what my job is, this is what your job is. than just point the fingers and move on. And that's not how you're going to get ahead, because no one wants to work with that person.
And that's a really big step, actually, to go from blaming everybody else and to saying, well, you didn't do what I told you to do, to actually saying, well, that's my fault. I didn't explain it. I must not have explained it well enough. You might think you did, but maybe you didn't. So to get to a point where you can actually have that self-awareness to say, well, no, I'm in charge. Whatever's happened is my problem. That's
Right.
how long does that take to get to that point when you start the journey of trying to be self-aware? Because that's quite a long journey to get there.
I think it's different for every person, and it depends on what state of life you are in and how quickly you are ready to take accountability. And so in talking about ownership, there was three questions that I added to the book that can help you understand a situation. So let's go back to the situation where you assigned something that didn't go properly the way you looked at it, and of not maybe being in that mindset where now it's kind of instinctive for me to say when something didn't go wrong, okay, what didn't I do? What could I have done better? These things. And so you start to look at, like, how could I have prepared better for the situation? What behavior could I have changed before, during, or after this happened? And how could I have communicated better? And so it makes it a question set about yourself versus about other people. And that starts to get your mind to be in shape for having that thought process of, hey, this didn't go right. I'm going to point, nope. I don't point fingers. How do I reshape my thoughts so that I can think more towards fixing this situation versus just pointing fingers, which isn't going to get anyone, to move forward either in the project or in their career or what they're trying to do.
I wanted to go over also the part where you talk about calculated risk. So I saw this and I thought, wow, what's going to be in this section where it says in chapter 8, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Because I found that fascinating.
Yeah. So it's something I think that I've always somewhat done naturally, because I don't, for lack of better phrasing, I don't care quite so much. Like, I've been fired, I've been laid off, all of these things have happened to me in my career, and I always look at it as a learning experience. It's never something that has been like, oh God, I'm never going to get a job again. It's like, I've been laid off, I found a job a few weeks later, got fired, found a job a few weeks later. Like, it's not the end of your career. But if you're not willing to take these calculated risks, you're not going to grow in ways that other people are. And so I look at this kind of from the agile mindset, but wanted to throw this in because it's kind of a different mindset shift to agile. And so the thought process is, your boss doesn't want to give you permission for everything that you do. They don't have enough time, and frankly, they don't care enough. Like, it's not that they don't care enough about you and what you need to do for the project, for the corporation, whatever it may be. It's they don't want to put that much time into managing you and micromanaging you. Micromanaging takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time, and some people just don't realize that micromanagement comes from a lack of trust. And so what we're trying to get through here in this chapter around asking for forgiveness and not permission is, how can you figure out at what level can you not ask for permission until you get your hand slapped? So the example I give in the book is, I talk a little bit about how at one point I went through and signed up for a server through AWS, and I completely skipped the process for security and other stuff inside my company, knowing that I was making a $15 decision and not like $1 million decision. And I knew that, okay, if I'm gonna get my hand slapped, I'll pay back the $15, or it's $15. It's a multi-billion-dollar corporation, so it's like 1/1000th of a penny that I was spending on behalf of the corporation to try and move something forward. Knowing that if this worked, the success of the project was exponential in comparison to not doing this or waiting the months and months and months to go through the proper corporate structure. And I'm sure everyone can relate with that, of knowing the red tape and the other BS that you have to get through. And it's then trying to figure out, what pieces of red tape can I skip? What pieces of BS can I skip to help my project be successful and do it in a much, much quicker time? And so again, going back to the example I gave, I got that server, it sped up my project for about 2 months and saved the company over $100,000, because we proved something that we were going to pay a vendor $100,000 to build wasn't worth building. And so we spent 15, a little bit of interns time for like 3 days, I think it was, to build this proof of concept, to realize that, hey, what we wanted this vendor to build wasn't going to do any good for the corporation. They decided to nix that project. If we would have waited the 2 months, the team would have been like, oh, we need this. The seasonality of our business is coming up. We need it. We need it. We need it. We went ahead and paid for it, to then spend $100,000 plus some to actually make it work the way they needed to then find out it was never going to work anyways. And so it's about understanding those risks to help move the project forward, to help the corporation and have that massive impact, rather than just saying, I don't want to spend the $15. I'm too scared. I'm just going to keep going through this red tape and eventually get something to happen.
Some people might say that they've been given a role and that's the role that they're supposed to do and that's the role they get paid for. And it's not up to them to do their manager's job and think outside the box and do things like this that are obviously very impactful. But clearly what you did made a huge impact. What would you say to that person that says that to you?
For me, that's fine. So there is a different level of people you're going to have in the company. You're going to have, I forget which book it was phrased in, where they have superstars and rock stars. And then there's like a third one where it's just like those who want to be. The superstars are people who really, really want to get going. They want to progress. They want to go. They want a new raise or a new something every year, every other year, whatever it may be. And then you have the rock stars that are just really good at their job. They want to just be crushing it. Like, they're a programmer. They don't want to be a manager. They don't want to do anything else. They just want to program because they love programming. And then you have the other people who just want to be, like, they're there to do the tasks, to make the widget that they were asked to be. And so there could be a bit of either that rock star or just that be in that phrase. And if that's where you want to be, great. That's what you enjoy in your career. But if you're that superstar, that not asking for permission all the time is going to make you look infinitely better than anyone else inside your corporation, because you're going to have the massive impact. All corporations exist to make money, right? Like, maybe they're doing great in the world for something that they're trying to make progressive changes on. Like, I'm a big fan of Tesla and how he is pushing the use of renewable energy for cars. And that's something that they've done, which is super exciting. But to do that, you need money. So if you're not making money, you can't make change in the world to make the world a better place. And so, as I mentioned, all corporations exist to make money. And so if you're helping the corporation make more money faster or save more money, then you're going to look good to that entire corporation to help your career catapult forward in ways that all these other people aren't doing.
It's kind of a form of taking ownership of your position, isn't it? And thinking through the opportunities and what it is that you can do to help your team move forward, or for you to move forward, or even the company to move forward.
Right.
But in taking these risks, how careful do we have to be that we're not going to get in a lot of trouble on the other side of it?
And that's for me where it's progressive. Like, I knew the $15, I'm going to get my hand slapped at $15. One, I'll pay the $15 back. I'll say, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. But secondly, that means I'm also probably not at the right company. The culture fit for me in that company is probably not great. Whereas on the other side, I'm not going to sign $1 million contract, because that's way above my pay grade. And that's something I'm probably not going to do, that's not going to get me fired and or severely disciplined. But in the role I was in, my cap was about $10,000. I still signed a few contracts for $100,000, very well knowing that it was going to help push the company forward and do things that we needed within our team. And those $100,000 investments ended up turning into $500,000 and $600,000 increases in profit or decreases in cost. And so it was kind of knowing what that risk is, but progressively doing it to say, like, oh, here's the peak. This is where a company is gonna yell at me, and they'll tend to overlook that one time for all of the stuff that you've done before that has been much, much better, because they've seen this history of you taking risks to do things. They're not going to slam you if you go from like 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. If you go from 1 to 10, then there could be a big problem. And so it's about understanding that risk in between and knowing how to balance that out.
You speak about multipliers as well a fair bit in chapter 9. What is this concept? You're listening to the Kuinua podcast. If you want to ask a question to our experts, just go to kuinuacoaching.com and you will find the link to the podcast where you can leave us a voice message or send us an email, and we will ask your question direct to the expert. That's kuinuacoaching.com. Kuinua Coaching is set up to offer mentoring, coaching and courses in leadership, negotiation and soft skills. If you're interested in finding out more about what Kuinua Coaching has to offer you, you can get in touch via Facebook, Instagram, you can type Kuinua into Google. You can email us on kuinuacoaching@gmail.com or go to our website at kuinuacoaching.com. That's kuinuacoaching.com.
So the concept of multipliers versus diminishers is this mindset that you have people inside the corporation that get more out of others than don't. And so if I were to go and give a presentation or some of the workshops I've done, and I say, think about someone that has helped you get more done in your career than anyone else. And they're usually like, oh yeah, this boss, that boss, this leadership person, that leadership person. And then I say, okay, flip it up. Think about a person that just crushed your dreams and whatever. And they all have examples of both. They both exist inside the corporation. And so the thought process of this multipliers versus diminishers is getting people this structured way. And so this is something I took from the book Multipliers by Liz Weissman and Rob McEwen. Hopefully I didn't mix up their last names there. But it's this kind of step-by-step process on how to build teams. And so like they had a very solid structure, and it's something that I've used in the past and seen great success from. And so wanted to share that with other people on here's a step-by-step process. And you don't need to be this exceptional person, this amazing person, but you need to learn how to put together a team, what to look for, how to challenge people to get that growth. And in that, you tend to get, I would have to look back in the book to get the exact numbers, but exponential output from those people. It's like 100% more from some people, because when they work with the diminishers, it's like, oh, I give like maybe 30 to 50%. But when I work with a multiplier, it's 80 to 110%, because that extra 10% comes from that multiplier getting more from that person than they knew they could actually give. And so it's a quantifiable measurement in how you can build teams and grow that impact inside the corporation.
You even kind of break it down into how do you have a one-to-one? And so many people always say, how can I have a one-to-one and give bad news or, help the person? And some people say, well, the feedback in a one-to-one is retrospective. So it feels like, you're having to defend yourself and things like that. So what are kind of your top tips for one-to-ones to get the best out of them?
So I think there's two things there. One is that level of feedback, and then there's the one-to-one. So the level of feedback needs to happen in the moment as best possible. With that, there's caveats. Is one, always ask permission to give feedback. Don't ever just give someone feedback without giving their permission, because without asking permission, it can come off as even negative or something. Even if it's a positive piece of feedback, you need to ask that permission. Secondly, never ever give negative feedback in public. Always do it off to the side. So if something happens in a meeting, never do it in the moment. Say, hey, can we talk after this? I want to give some feedback, and give feedback after that time. But then in the one-to-one, it should be more about the employee coming to you as a leader, as a manager, and having a conversation. So in the one-to-ones, I never brought those times of, hey, in this meeting a week ago, you could have done something better, because we already talked about it. It happened in the moment. We talked about it in the moment. In the one-to-one, it's their chance to come to me for stuff that they haven't had a chance to talk to me on. So whether I was traveling or busy with other meetings or whatever it may be, it's 20 to 25 minutes of their time. I have zero agenda. They are coming to me with conversations to have. So some people I had would come with bulleted lists, like very detailed things that they wanted to talk about on how we could improve something within the team. Or some people would come in and then we would just shoot the shit for 20 minutes and hang out and talk nothing about work. But that was their one-to-one time, and that's what they wanted to do with me. That's their opportunity to have the conversation. But it's setting that cadence of having that conversation. So you need to, at least the way I did it, was every other week with the direct reports, and then once a month with anyone below them. But any direct reports who had reports, again, every other week. It's a cadence you can figure out with your team. Some people like once a week, some people like once a month. It just really depends on how much interaction you have. But I was fairly hands off with everyone. So I needed to have every other week to give them a chance to talk and help me fix things in the team that maybe I wasn't seeing. And so the big piece there is making sure that as the leader or the manager, whoever, that you're showing that you're listening to them. So if they come to you with a complaint, you have a couple of different options. You can say, oh, how would you solve this? How would you go about solving this? What can I do to help? Or, oh, this is an issue. It's probably not something you can solve. Let me take care of it. Or you can say, hey, this is something I've seen in the past. It usually dies out. Let's give it a couple weeks. If you want to talk about it again in a week because you still think it's an issue, we'll talk about it then. But you can't always use number 3. and then never actually do anything about it because it shows you're not really listening or that you don't really care. So if you kind of go through that level of things that they're working on, it shows that you care and that people are excited and wanting to continue that engagement. If they feel they're never being listened to, then they're never going to share anything with you. So you can't ever make the culture or the process or anything better within the team.
What's your opinion on performance reviews at the end of the year? Because you're saying that you give feedback as things happen. Because
Yeah.
I think your general kind of performance review is you've done this bad or you've done this good, and this is how we move forward. What's your opinion on how that should be used?
I do not think many companies structure them very well, and or the managers don't use them the way that they are potentially intended. It really depends on what is connected to that performance review, which is usually some sort of pay increase or usually some sort of bonus. So I was within a large corporation for a long time, and the manager would give had 13%, a range of 13%, and she would split it up to where the top performers got 7 and the people who were mediocre got 6. So like, even though I was a top performer for 2 years in a row, I got a 7% increase, which is pretty significant. Like, that's not a low amount of money, but if I'm outperforming everyone else on the team, why don't I get the 13% and they get a 2% or somewhere in between? But also, as a manager, it makes it hard to quantify some of those things because you aren't given the tools, such as doing OKRs or something along those lines, to be able to quantify those metrics. And so the more I've grown, the more I like having a base of an OKR to be able to gauge some performance that someone had over the years. But it's never about, hey, during January, you had these projects that didn't go well. Let's talk about those. It's going to be, over the course of the year, here's a large view of the things that you've covered. And based on feedback I've seen from other people and feedback I've given other people, you hit within this baseline. But it also becomes tough because a former manager I had brought up a really good point for me. He had was in a similar position because we were talking about bonuses. And he's like, oh, I outperformed everyone on the team. But he goes, the bonus and stuff was based around personal performance. So he goes, even though I crushed it one year and was better than other people on my team, he goes, I didn't really improve myself in year 2. So he goes, I got a lower performance grade in year 2 because the manager was like, well, you just did the same things you did last year. Even though you're outperforming everyone, that doesn't mean you get that increase because you're better than everyone else, because you're not better than yourself a year ago. So why should I pay you more money if you're not better than yourself a year ago? So there's so much stuff that goes into it. I don't know the direct answer, but it's just something I think that more companies need to put time into. I found that OKRs are a great way to help bring some balance, but I still am not certain that everyone is super excited about the different raises and stuff that they get, which tends to be why they jump companies and other stuff, because when you get a promotion, they tend to base your promotion based on salary within the company versus like looking out into the market. So there's a lot there to unpack, unfortunately. Which makes it kind of a frustrating topic for me.
It is quite interesting because when you've got performance reviews and they're not based on any bonus, it's kind of hard to know what you're talking about. And if you have to fill in these whole big pieces of paperwork and then go
Right.
into a performance review, and then your manager gets exemplary because they've been bringing in investment because they're allowed to do that and talk to people, and the team has got a really bad rating because they've not been able to do anything that would actually class them in that category of doing really well. That's really difficult to reconcile. So I think that maybe I think there's got to be a really weird structure to be able to put everybody on it in the team and the manager to be able to benchmark people, and then
Right.
against each other, but then also take all the paperwork and all the feedback and everything. I've honestly never found them of any use, to be perfectly honest. I find the
Mm-hmm.
one-to-ones are more useful as an ongoing progress marker rather than a yearly development review. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, I would absolutely agree, because I think that yearly review for me at the end is more just about putting pen to paper, doing the red tape process, and making sure that everyone feels that they were listened to and heard. Like, I've had some very tough conversations where people wanted raises and other stuff, and I was able to very clearly point back to times during the year that we had conversations that I asked for improvement that I didn't see improvement. And so it makes an easier way to do that when you're connecting year over year or month over month or week over week, because you can say, hey, we need improvement here. And if this is where you want to be, this is what I expect from a particular senior engineer. Because the big difference between a junior and a senior person is not so much that they know how to write code better. It's that they solve problems quicker. And because you've made those mistakes as a junior, but if you're still making those mistakes and I'm not seeing progression, I'm not seeing you mentor, then I'm not going to give that pay raise. But having the weekly conversations or every other week, whatever it is, allows you to very clearly say that and say, look, we've had him over the year, and it's not just a surprise at the end. That I think is very detrimental to the culture, is very detrimental to the employee, and will ultimately ruin what you have going on in that team.
I completely agree. I wanted to ask as well, just to kind of finish on, because I know we're going to run out of time, but I wanted to get through as much of this content as possible because it's so interesting. You started talking about Agile and Waterfall. What context is that within in the book?
Everything, I guess. So the big thing that I like Agile about is it's about learning. It is an empirical methodology, meaning that when you try something, you should design it as an experiment so you have data to make decisions. So the context I put Agile in the book was you should use Agile to advance your career. So we learn better in practice. We as humans don't just look at a book, read something, and then say, oh, now I know how to do this. So let's go back to math, or maths, as you may call it. We have this notion of seeing it in the book, being taught it, and then you have to repeat and go through something to figure out, okay, now I know how addition works. Now I know how algebra works. Now I know how these things work. It's not just read the book and then, oh, I magically understand how to do algebra. The same thing same thing happens for essentially everything. And so if you in your career just want to do this, well, I have to do all of these things before I can do this next thing, and all of these things before I do this next thing, which is the premise of the waterfall methodology, you're going to be much slower than everyone else that says, I'm going to do this one thing. Oh, this didn't work, but now I know kind of what works. I'm going to try this. And oh, this still doesn't quite work. I'm going to try this next thing. And now I see where it's starting to work. And so this progression becomes like this. Whereas most people think everything in their career is like, oh, it's flatline, flatline, flatline. And there's just straight up, it's that hockey stick graph. But it's about making the changes over time. And so you progressively become better over time by making mistakes and trying out new things. And so whereas Agile started from this methodology of building software so that you break large pieces of work down into small chunks, I'm thinking everyone should do the same with their career or projects with inside work. And so I give some examples in the book of where someone says, oh, I think I could integrate this new process for the recruiting department. Well, it's not just, hey, okay, now I'm going to implement this entire process and overhaul communications for the recruiting department. I'm going to try out and say, like, maybe we should try SMS and do text messaging with our people who are applying, or maybe we should use email for setting this or whatever. It's trying out little bits and seeing what works, and then learning from what works and what doesn't, and then trying something new. And the quicker you can do that throughout your career, the better off you're going to be when it comes to looking for that next promotion or whatever, because going back to those superstars, rock stars, and asking for permission, or not asking for permission, asking for forgiveness, you've started to catapult and set yourself apart from everyone else because you're learning faster than everyone else. And that's the key to progressing in your career. It's how quickly can you learn? If you stay stagnant in what it is that you're trying to do, you're never going to progress. The more, and they like to call it fail fast, or however you want to look at it. I don't know. It's a weird thing to say fail fast because there's negative connotations to that. So it's more of learning fast than it is failing, but you can't go through that learning unless you're making mistakes and learning along the way. That feedback loop is what helps you learn quicker and better than any other process of just reading a book and then never doing anything about it. And that's something I try to put forth in mind is, okay, cool. Now you've read all this, you understand all this. Now you got to do it. Now you got to try it.
That's actually really interesting because that applies to entrepreneurs as well. Because so many people say, right, I'm not going to launch until I've got the website and the podcast and the this and the that, and it's all set up and it's all perfect and it's all branded and it's running. When I set up Kuno Coaching, I just threw it out there and said, right, does anyone like it? And then I did the branding because otherwise you're doing something and you don't know if it's going to work. And if you've invested all of that money in trying to get everything together and it's not going to work, there's not really a lot of point. And actually, if you do one thing at a time, you can figure out which one does work and which one doesn't. So you can stop doing the things that don't work as well. So I think that's a really amazing application that you've got there in the book.
Absolutely. And it's like, just as you mentioned, like, let's put everything together. Cause I started to do that with, when I was launching my business, and it was like, oh, I got to get the website done. I got to do all these things. And I was like, why am I wasting my time on this, on something that I think people like, and I have no idea. And so after like 2 weeks of like working too much on the website, I was like, no. We're going to shift it up. We're going to start running experiments. And so sometimes it's easy to fall back into that old way because you're like, oh, I don't want to put something out there that people think are stupid. But you can't ever learn what people like if you don't test along the way. Like, you're never going to hit a bullseye on the first shot, the first time you pick up a bow and arrow or a gun or whatever. And it's the same thing with business. You've got to test along the way. You've got to practice. And some businesses take longer than others to get off the ground, because sometimes you have that pulse of the market. You know exactly what they need to solve problems, and other times it takes you a little bit of a time to figure out what the marketing language is, or directly connecting to that frustration that they have, or wording in a way that emotionally connects to that frustration that they have, and trying to piece it together that way.
Well, Brandon, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on. Thank you so much for letting me read the book and for coming on to speak about it. Would you like to let our listeners know, and our viewers as well on YouTube, where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, I do pretty much all of my stuff through LinkedIn. So if you want to connect there, I think the last time we did the podcast, we put my LinkedIn URL, which is just /Brandon Dohman at the end. I have all my information on that page, but I also have dynamiccorporateleader.com, which talks a little bit about my book and the program. If you're interested in the book specifically, it's just book.dynamiccorporateleader.com. That will take you to the order page. I don't sell it on Amazon or any of the other places. I'm just doing it all directly now because, as we mentioned, I can test the wording and stuff to see what people like and what people are looking for. The nice thing about it is, only doing ebook and audiobook, I can make updates. So I've had a few people who have read it come back and be like, oh, there's a typo here, or this paragraph doesn't quite make sense. And then I hear somebody else that says, oh, this paragraph doesn't quite make sense. And so I go through and I reword it. So it's constantly updating and constantly changing as I get that feedback, and I'm able to add more to the book. So it's something that will grow more in time.
And all the links will be down below, so you can click straight through, and I would highly recommend you get this book because it's a fantastic book for anybody that wants to be in leadership. Thank you so much, Brandon, for being on today.
Thank you. It was fun being here.
You've been watching on YouTube or listening on an audio platform to the Kunoa podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any amazing content, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Kunoa Coaching.